I'm actually a workplace consultant, a change manager, and an environmental psychologist. So I'm interested in particular in the behavior of people in the built environment. I don't do rats. I like to look at people in the real world, and that obviously causes a few issues in terms of ecological validity and how we get data and so on. But do we have any other psychologists in the audience other than Christian? Oh, hey, a few at the back, a few over here. Architects? Yeah, a few architects. Engineers? A few engineers. Okay, so we're fairly transdisciplinary here tonight. I also would like to say that when it comes to psychology, we're all psychologists because right from an early age, we all learn how to understand people's emotions and behaviors, and if you're a politician or a baby, you learn how to manipulate those behaviors. And that's just one school of thought. So welcome to all the psychologists, all of you in the audience. And tonight, I haven't got much time, but I want to touch on 3 fields of psychology. So I'm going to give you a very high-level perspective. And the first one, as you can see, is psychophysics. And I'm going to throw a bit of personality theory into there for good measure. I want to talk about environmental psychology, my own field, and also about the fairly latest field of psychology, which is the evolutionary psychology. And I'm hoping that you'll be interested, especially those who don't know much about psychology. And also, I tend to work, I do lecture at UCL part-time, but I also have a day job as consulting, workplace consulting. I tend to look at the interior environment, so I'm working on people's workstations and offices, but most of what I say today, I think is relevant to the broader urban environment and placemaking. So psychophysics is a formal definition there for those who are interested. But I like to think of it just as, it's the way that we perceive and interpret the world and how we react to that interpretation. And in a lot of work I've been doing recently, which I want to focus on tonight, is in psychoacoustics, so how we interpret the acoustic world. So the way I see it, or the way we see it, is that out there you've basically got air pressure waves. They're bouncing around. And then what happens is those air pressure waves hit the eardrum, and go through to the cochlea, and that's when we perceive sound. And it's mostly a physiological response, but that's when we perceive sound. So you may have had that question, if no one's there to hear a tree falls, does it make a sound? Well, that's because sound is a perception. It goes on in our heads. And then the more interesting thing happens is where you get cognition. So we've now perceived that sound, and now we start to interpret it based on all sorts of factors, context, attitude, all sorts of cognitive reasoning and functioning. And again, what I'd like to explain here is that noise itself, when we talk about noise in the office in particular, noise is defined as unwanted sound. So it's us, it's what goes on inside our heads that determines whether the sounds that we've heard are actually a noise or not. And when you look at the literature, you'll see that in terms of sound measurements, sound pressure level measurements, they only account for about 25% of the variance in noise annoyance. So that means 75% is down to other factors, and I believe they're mostly psychological. And when I talk to acousticians, I know there's some engineers, but have we got any acousticians in the audience? Yeah, when I talk to acousticians, they get really upset with me because you're so obsessed with measuring sound, and you know what? That's only going to explain 25% of the variance. What about the other 75%? So that's why you need psychologists. And by the way, I'll say it now. When I worked for a large architectural practice back in the early noughties, people used to say to me, why do we need psychologists? And I find it really amazing now that people would question the value of psychologists working with architects in the built environment. So I just threw that one in. So again, just back on, so I'm saying that it's not about sound level, it's about our interpretation of whether it's a noise or not. So I'll give you an example. Most people use the dripping tap example, that's boring. I'm going to use Glastonbury as my example. So at Glastonbury, you've got the kids down the front in the mosh pits, and they've got their ears so close to the speakers that their ears may be bleeding. If they're not bleeding, they will certainly have something called the Stapedi's reflex. And this is where your bones in your ear actually separate, because they're trying to protect you. And that's why when you go away from a loud environment, a disco, a nightclub, whatever, you get that muggy feeling, you can't quite hear things. It's because your body's saying you're putting yourself in danger. So But they don't perceive it as noise. They perceive it as euphony. They love this sound, this music. Meanwhile, the major, he's 3 miles down the road drinking his gin and tonic on a Sunday afternoon, thinking, what the hell is that racket going on in that muddy field? So we perceive the same sounds very differently, even if they're the same levels or even quieter. So that's about context and attitude. And now you can see some other factors that the literature over the years has flagged up as what affects our interpretation of noise. And what I love about being a psychologist, and the others in the room will recognize this, we've done stuff over the years which is really good, but no one else knows about it. Because we write it so badly, they can't. So what I love is, I get commissioned to do literature reviews, and I just look at the stuff done in the 50s, in the 80s, and I just say, do you know what? It's still relevant today, but we haven't acted on it. So a lot of the research I'm talking about today was actually done in the 50s by Donald Broadbent. But there's lots of research that shows how things like context, as I mentioned, obviously what we do, the activity, are we concentrating, are we socializing, control, perceived control, very big impact on noise, and then personality and mood. And I just want to give you an example here of personality and mood and some research I've done. So we just did a survey, an online survey, and we've now got about 2,500 people who've responded to our survey, and the first thing we get them to do is to fill out a personality profiling tool. And I use Ocean, the Big 5 personality inventory. Do any of you know that one? No? Okay, a few. Do any of you know Myers-Briggs? Have any of you been subjected to Myers-Briggs? Right, so Myers-Briggs is a personality profiling tool, but it's highly commercial and you have to pay for a license. This tool was developed by Berkeley University, so it's free to researchers. So any of you think they're doing personality stuff, this is the way to go. And as long as you offer to share your data with them, they're fine about it. Now, I'm not going to go through all the big 5 personality factors today. And by the way, there are lots of different personality dimensions, but over the years, we've tried to get it down to something manageable. So 5's a good number. I can cope with that. I'm not very good at maths. So I want to talk about extroversion, introversion, and neuroticism and emotional stability. So we all know about extroverts. They tend to be the social animals, risk takers, thrill seekers, tend to think on their feet a lot, tend to be quite gobby. Someone who does maybe a presentation is happy to stand up and talk to a group of strangers. And then you have the introverts, and really important people often get forgotten in the built environment because designers like designing buzzy, stimulating environments for extroverts. But introverts tend to be comfortable with their own company, like to mull things over, better at detail, better at analysis. So you've got these 2 very different types of personality, both which exist in the same space, whether it's a workplace or other environment. Neuroticism is a horrible word, but it basically means someone who's a bit apprehensive, a bit nervous, they dwell on the past, they overthink things. Whereas your emotionally stable people are a bit more carefree and easygoing. I have a very volatile combination. I'm a neurotic extrovert. Love giving presentations, worried sick about them all the time. So I'm not going to go through the full paper, and actually I normally only present, we've only up to date published the data based on 500 or so responses. This is the first outing of the data based on 2,500 responses. And what you can see very clearly from this is when we ask people about how their working environment, so we ask them how their working environment, whether it was home office and a private office or the open plan, and we just ask them how it affected various ratings of noise, or the effect of noise. So right from how it affects their concentration and decision-making and memory, right the way through to whether they find it stressful or not. And you can see from this, and it's all statistically significant, small to medium-term effects, but all statistically significant. And you can see that the extroverts can cope much better or tolerate much better noisier environments than their colleagues. And that just supports what we said found in the 1950s and 1980s. But this was done in real-world survey. And then you can see the same happens with the neurotics and the emotionally stable. So neurotic people are more prone to noise disturbance, noise distraction. And as I said, the issue here is when we're trying to tackle noise distraction in the office, we're dealing with 2 very different dimensions of people, but we treat them all the same. And it's only by understanding the psychology that we can start to help people reduce noise distraction. One of the things we do is we do profiling of teams, and if we go in and we find that the team is mostly maybe introverts, mostly agreeable people, highly conscientious people, well, we tend to find that they prefer a calming environment. It so happens that those people also tend to do jobs that involve lots of heavy processing and analytical work, concentration. So we need to provide a nice calming base for them, but even those people occasionally need spaces to go and socialise and meet and be noisy and so on. And that might be analysts, researchers, dare I say, finance people. They tend to be attracted to, they tend to have particular personality types that need calming environments. Or I might have a highly extroverted, agreeable, maybe not neurotic, emotionally stable group of people like marketeers and salespeople. So for them, yeah, give them a stimulating environment, but even those people need to occasionally chill and relax and get some time to themselves. So we know, for example, that when it comes to meeting spaces, spaces for interaction and collaboration, we found that our extroverts and our people are more open people, they're more creative type people. They tend to, and the agreeables, they tend to prefer informal meetings, smaller meetings. They like to meet in bars and cafes and maybe huddle rooms and so on. So they're quite happy with this kind of informal types of meetings because they tend to think in big picture and they like bouncing ideas off each other and so on. Whereas our introverts and highly conscientious people and our neurotics, the neurotics and the conscientious people, they tend to prefer more formal meeting spaces, and they like people to make notes, particularly the neurotics, like everything to be minuted, and they like it to be formal and agendas and all of that kind of thing, and closed doors and private meetings and lots of confidentiality, because that's what meetings should be about, not just going down the bar and having a bit of a chat. So that's what they do. And then we asked the introverts, what did they prefer? And they said email. So if you want to know whether your colleagues are extroverts or introverts, you will know when you're in a meeting that the extroverts are the ones going, me, I've got an idea, listen to me, how good I am. And the introverts say absolutely nothing, and then you get a 20-page email from them. So that's how you tell. So they prefer, and then if they do meet, they prefer one-to-one cozier meetings just because of their nature. So my next field was environmental psychology, and the difference here between us and some of the other psychologists is we believe that behaviour is not just determined by the physical environment, but it's also determined what goes on in your head. And we tend to think of it in terms of, and it was mentioned earlier, I think, by Kathy, we tend to think about our experiences and expectations and how they influence our perception of an interpretation of the world. So we have one equation in psychology, and that's pretty much it. We're not very good at equations. Back to my MSc days, I'm a real fan of Roger Barker, and he came up with this idea of behavioural settings. So what Roger Barker was saying is, we don't believe in architectural determinism. No, that's too strict. That's Skinnerian. What we say is we can nudge behaviours. We can do certain things to help change behaviours a little bit. But as I said, it all depends on what's going on in your head at the time. But what Barker was saying is that when it comes to certain settings, we know from our experiences and expectations how to behave immediately. So we know how to behave in churches. We know how to behave in libraries, for example. That's instilled in us at an early age. So actually, when you design spaces, office spaces, particularly like when we have problems with noise, you can use visual clues to help trick people a little bit. So if I want people to be quieter in the space, I might include more bookshelves and books and make it a kind of calmer, more subdued environment. And it will people will just say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be a little bit more quieter in this environment. But it's not determinism, it's just a little bit of nudging. And then another one which you may have come across is Proxemics. So this is the idea that we've all got these space bubbles or space zones around us, personal space zones around us. And the shortest one is the intimate space. So within half a metre, we only like people who we like, our lovers and our friends, our very intimate friends and so on, our children, to come into that space. So some people get really nervous when you stand next to them for no apparent reason. So but it's also situational. On the tube, we all hate it, but you kind of have to put up with it because there's no choice. In other areas, in the old days when we used to watch football on the terraces, it was part of watching the football to be in a crowded space with people in your face. But in the workplace, probably not the right thing. And you can then see that the next zone is the personal space, where it tends to be colleagues, well, actually friends, not even colleagues. Colleagues fall into the social space. And one thing I'm concerned about right now is that in offices, desks are getting smaller and smaller. That is a big problem with acoustics, but it also makes some people feel a little bit edgy, unnerved, because you're basically infringing in their personal space as well. And it's not always easy to measure, but actually neuroscientists probably pick up on some of those things. Galvanic skin response as well, some physiological responses. Another theory that we were taught back when I did my master's was about sociofugal and sociopetal space. So this is about whether you're designing spaces that attract people, and people are attracted to, they want to interact, they want to hang around. So they're sociopetal, or they're sociofugal spaces, where basically you're trying to make people feel a bit uncomfortable, get rid of them. Certainly they wouldn't want to hang around and do some chatting and so on. And the example I always use, and it is being videoed, so I have to be careful, but the example I always use is McDonald's. So some of you may remember in the old days, McDonald's, it was harsh lighting, formica tops, very harsh seating, a nasty environment. And it was all about get your burger and bugger off. We don't want you hanging around. That's how it was designed. Now it's different, isn't it? Now it's sofas, soft lighting. It's like being at home. Have a little latte, sit down, have a chat with your friends. They want people to hang around for some reason. I don't know why. Never go to McDonald's. Okay. And then the final field I want to talk about is evolutionary psychology. So fairly new subject of psychology. And you all know about survival of the fittest. You all know about evolution of the human body, unless you're a creationist. But if you're not, you will believe this. And what we know is that over millennia, our physiology has evolved to help us survive on the African savannah. And what the evolutionary psychologists believe is also that happens to be the same for the brain. Now the problem is, whilst the brain has taken millennia to evolve to survive in the African savannah, we've only been indoors for about 300, 350 years, and we've only been working in the modern office for 100 years. So our brain hasn't caught up. It can't. Evolution doesn't work like that. It takes much longer. So the problem is our brain is wired for a completely different environment to the ones that we all end up working in, unless you're lucky and you work in a field somewhere. So what we know, more and more research now, and actually particularly supported by neuroscientists, is we know that there are these innate preferences, there are these innate reactions to nature and to the world. So, for example, daylight's very important for us, not just physiologically, because it helps control our circadian rhythms, helps us sleep better, and so on. But daylight helps with the passing of time. We need to see out. We need daylight to help. I don't know if any of you have ever been in an office where they've got tinted windows, and you go out and you go, oh my gosh, it's still daylight. I thought it was dark. It's kind of a little bit disorientating. Kirsten's already mentioned about views out, vistas, about the idea that we like views out, but we don't like being overlooked from behind. That obviously harks back to the days when we wanted to be the hunters and not the hunted. So again, that applies to the office environment. We like views out, particularly of nature, and there's been some really good research there showing quicker recovery times in hospitals, but also higher productivity in office environments when people have good daylight and views out. Temperature is an interesting one because our industry, my industry, the building industry, we're obsessed with constant temperatures, the engineers. Got to be 22 in the winter, 24 in the summer. Do not fluctuate from that. No. Actually, as human beings, we like fluctuations in temperature. We like to feel temperature change a little bit. We like a little gentle breeze on our skin. We don't like a draft down the back of our necks, but we like to feel the gentle breeze. It's part of harping back to the days when we're outside. And we like that bit of air movement, as I said, that gentle movement. We like to hear the trees swaying a little bit. We like other natural sounds like natural water, bird song. And we like sound at that kind of level that you would get out in nature, about 38 dB. What happens if there's no sound at all, if it's completely quiet?
Extremely stressful.
It's stressful because it's not natural. It means danger. There's a fire or something about to happen. The animals have all flown. So you know, we need to understand what kind of sound levels we need in an office. We don't like intense sounds and so on. And again, there's lots of, not lots, there's companies now looking at bringing natural sounds into the office. They call it soundscaping rather than sound masking. And also, we're quite inquisitive and social animals, so we like to explore, we like nooks and crannies, we don't just like big open areas, we like you know, a bit of intrigue and interest, prospect and refuge. And the social element, we need to come together occasionally. We can't work in isolation all the time. Obviously, introverts are a little bit better than extroverts at doing that, but even then, we are social animals at the end of it. We like to come together, share food, share stories, share a drink. And I always say, if you've got a breakout space or a meeting area and it's not being used, just put a plate of biscuits down. It's like the wildebeest coming to the watering hole. You'll see them come in. And so yeah, food and drink, very important. And also the opposite to that, we are contemplative creatures. We do like a bit of calm and quiet occasionally as well. We need to find spaces or provide spaces for that. And I hope you can see how this doesn't just apply to the office, but this applies to urban environments as well. All these things apply to urban environments. We need that mix of spaces, and we need them accessible to people. And they need to be able to find them as well. And then I threw in animal affinity. We're one of the few creatures that actually have an affinity to other animals. We're allowed to bring dogs into the workplace if you work for certain companies, you know who they are. But I did read a funny story. A big company, IT company, that do a lot of search engine type stuff, and they said that, yeah, you can bring your pets into the office, and some guy turned up with a snake. And so then they've changed their policy now. It's got to be furry, right? And
be a rat.
yeah, you're using it right. And then finally, a big trend at the moment is biophilia and biophilic design, very on trend. So that's bringing nature into the office. But please, please, it's not just plants. It's not just a few house plants. Actually, biophilic design is all of these things I've said today. It's about daylight and everything. So if someone just offers you a pot plant and says, there you go, or potted plant, there you go. Be careful what I say here. Yeah, maybe there's benefits there, I don't know, medicinal. But if someone gives you a plant, no, it's more than that. I need access to daylight, I need food and drink, I need all of those things. That's all good biophilic design. As I said, there's lots of research showing these benefits. If you want to see it, just read something by Bill Browning, and all this document here by Browning and Cooper. But the one I like there, the 15% are based on a survey about 7,500 people. But the one I like there that they talk about is that one in the middle, 6% more productive. So they went to a contact center. It was in America, Sacramento Municipal Contact Center. And they looked at the people on the phones and so on who were near to the windows with views out, and they compared them with people who were much deeper in the office without views out. And they found, using very objective metrics, not just how they felt, but using their call center, contact center metrics, they found that the productivity was 6% higher for the people with views out. And I'm on record as saying a 6% improvement in productivity pays for your building. So it's worth doing just for that. So there you go. Just to remind you, I've spoken mostly about the internal environment, the office environment, but I do believe that as psychologists we can help with placemaking and creating better urban environments as well. Thank you.